That tagline sounds very familiar.
Mr. Khoza, I just have to remind you that you are still under oath. Mr. Msaj, do you have a sense of how long Mr. Van Zyl is going to be?
Mr. Van Zyl, I'm hoping will be no longer than half an hour.
Too long.
I'm sure that's music to his ears.
Yeah. Okay. Let's see, Mr. Khoza, how far you can go, and take heed of what Mr. July said.
Okay. Mr. Khoza, in paragraph 90, you refer in general terms, and we'll get to some of the specifics. I just want you to talk on a high level of what are the other issues that needs to be addressed in order to deal properly with transformation.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. I think from a CA perspective, I mean, transformation cannot be limited to only a numbers game, like I've highlighted in the broader explanation. And I think one of the issues to recognize is that it goes hand in hand in terms of the improvement of facilities, making coaches available, as well as making sure that there's equipment out there for those that you find that they need and are interested in partaking in this game. And later on, like Mr. Musa here said, I'll go into detail about the interventions and plans that we've put in place and delivered on to try and make sure that we can close down some of these gaps that have been identified in the process.
Mr. Khoza,
sorry, when you say short numbers game, you don't mean that you don't need numbers there. There has to be numbers. But those numbers, there must be other things that go with the numbers.
Correct, sir. And I think when I explain in the interventions in our programs, it will be much more clearer.
Yeah.
Because it's not just a number there, it goes with other issues.
one of the concerns raised during these hearings is that even though the number of black players in teams may have increased, most of those black players come from the elite private schools or Model C schools. Presumably you can't quibble with that complaint.
Chair, I think the important thing is to recognize where we come from. I think infrastructure and access was only cited in certain aspects. And when I go detail in terms of the interventions and programs, you'll see how we've shifted certain aspects, because we did realize, and I need to come back to that point of sustainability, that just relying on a few top schools around the country was not going to sustain this game. But we needed to make sure that we broaden our base so that we can have access to the greater pool of players. But in doing that, you don't want to lose the current guys that you have in terms of making sure that you can maximize and they can assist CSA in actually transforming the sport itself. So our youth cricket strategy speaks for itself, and even the selection of the under-19 team, you can see that it's a significant change. Some of the players are coming from schools that you wouldn't have envisaged that actually play cricket.
And we'll get to some of that just now. You talk in paragraph 91 of the importance of selection of some players from underprivileged communities. Why is that important, Mr. Khoza?
I think it comes back again to the CSA strategy of relevance, because if you don't have players that are actively playing, that can become active role models in the sport and that people can identify with, then there's no ways you're going to make sure that you can reach out to the greater communities out there. Because remember, the majority of the South Africa is disadvantaged people, and most of them are black. And the issue which is very vital, if you want to create meaningful access, some intervention has to happen there. As much as we acknowledge that the other model that we had, or former Model C schools, for example, was a way to get players there, give them bursaries or whatever. But when I go into detail, you start understanding actually other interventions that we've put to make sure that it doesn't have to take you to play for South Africa, that you have to leave your own environment and go somewhere else.
In fact, there are even a small percentage of black people who go to these white schools. So you are missing from those people who are in the townships.
Correct.
Who might be having skills. So correct. You need to go there.
And also, like I said, cricket is not immune from what's happening. What we're picking up as well, where there's migration of people and the demographics are changing, there's a threat as well in that aspect to some of the issues. when it comes to infrastructure, because when it was predominantly white, the membership and everybody at club level, everybody was playing. Now all of a sudden, when the demographics changes within that community, and if you don't put our finger and the pulse into those changing dynamics and making sure that that community, as it changes, that they have access to that infrastructure, we've started having issues.
Mr. Chair, paragraphs 94 to 96, I'm not inclined to deal with unless you want me to deal with, because I think there has been a lot of evidence from Saka, from Dr. Musaji and others about the culture camps.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Then in paragraphs 97 to 102, you deal with this notion that the captain of the Proteas men's team has more say than the selection panel. What is your view about that?
I think my views are that the allegations are incorrect. I think the selection policy speaks for itself in terms of what is guiding the selection processes. I think the important issue, if I may quote in terms of what we put here from a selection panel's policies and procedures and guidelines, is that the committee should have due regard to the views of the captain, who is entitled to freely, strongly indicate his preferences in selection. It also makes a point that the captain is not a member of the selection panel. Meaning, as a coach, looking at the parameters of who we're playing against, the conditions and everything else, I can consult my captain to say, I'm thinking we must go with this strategy. But I mustn't come back and say that the case, because he's not a selector as per se. He needs to influence in terms of now, if we're going with this strategy, this is the dynamic of the team that the coach is thinking of going with, and he can have input towards that so that he can execute the strategy on the field. Because cricket is not like soccer, Chair, where you find that the coach can stop the game, do a replacement, send a message through. What happens on the field of play, the captain is responsible. So that relationship is very key to make sure that whatever we're trying to put out there, that the captain understands what the coach is trying to do.
Okay.
How different is that? I mean, I've always proceeded. I understand what you're saying, but I've been mulling it over in my mind. How different is that, for instance, when you consider in the field of play in soccer or even in rugby? What is the role of the captain, and what's the relationship between the captain and the coach?
The dynamics of cricket are a little bit different, because the captain decides who bowls, who bats, who does well. And if the captain is not aligned to the strategy of the coach, then we will come into issues where we start questioning opportunities given to
the captain
play.
Cannot say, hey, now today you must play scrum to somebody.
No.
That is the coach's prerogative.
He must control what's happening within the game, who gets involved when.
Yeah.
And in terms of the issue, which is very vital and what one needs to highlight, normally when you appointing selectors, you always have to also understand that you're giving them an opportunity to actually take that level of authority and responsibility. Because I cannot appoint selectors and still as an administrator, want to interfere with their roles and responsibilities. Then I might as well do it myself. I think one of the key issues that we have to acknowledge is that maybe the assertiveness of some of the selection panel is something that we need to go back and really look into.
As I understand this issue about the captain having more authority, it's linked to the following. The selection is not involved in the selection. The selection committee makes the selection, and they will tell who is going to be the starting, who's going to be fielded. And then the captain, in this instance, the complaint, changes that. For instance, if I am number 12,
Yes.
I'm in a starting 11, the captain does not include me in the starting 11. But the selection committee, when it's selected, it said I would be on the starting 11. I think that is where the complaint is. Not so much as to who should be in the team.
No, I think, Chair, you must put it in this concept. Remember, the head coach lives and dies by the performance of the team. So if he's giving the captain that authority, which bypasses the policies and procedures that we have in place, then it's a problem. Because the issue is that he's accountable for the results on the field of play, the head coach. Because between him and the selectors, they decide on who needs to be part of the final 11. And he can't say if things doesn't go his way and say this is what the captain wanted, because that's not what the policy say. So it's quite important for us to actually be firmer in making sure that the policy is being followed. And that's why I still say now part of the issue is that we normally keep certain policies maybe to us as management and the coaching. But probably maybe a much more deeper issue needs to happen for the players to also understand what are the policies in place in relation to this aspect as well.
So according to you, the policy is that if the selection committee has decided
Correct.
on the first 11, it must be like that.
Correct. At the time of where this issue was raised.
Yes.
And over time, definitely certain things have changed, and which I can allude to as some of the improvements in the system.
Mr. Chair, then again, with your permission, I'm not inclined to get him to go through 103 to 111 because it's a lot of what they've done in relation to transformation, and I think it's contentious. Can I take you then to paragraph 117 of your affidavit, Mr. Khoza?
Yes.
You deal there with a complaint that Ashraf Ali had raised. And it seems to me that this complaint was supported by a few other witnesses. And the complaints are essentially selectors that are in fact coaches at the private schools or the Model C schools influence selection decisions. And when doing so, they tend to then only pick or support the players that come from their schools. In addition to that, there's an incentive for them to only pick the players that come from their schools, because the more representative players that school has, the greater that school's reputation and ability to attract other students. And this also feeds into the notion that unfortunately all of our representative teams are still largely from the Model C and the private schools. You want to comment on that? And I think you do that quite comprehensively in 118 to 121. So let's give us your thoughts on that.
I think we must also understand where we come from, and I hear his sentiments on his point. And I think maybe I must bring it to where I am as well, because I mean, back in 2003, I joined Northern's Cricket Union as a KFC mini cricket coordinator and a youth coordinator. When I got involved at the time, I mean, selection was based on definitely the guys are coming from the top schools. But over time, that has changed. Because we, as Cricket South Africa, or even the members at the time, we could sense that now, if you're going to probably create opportunities for everyone, it cannot only resolve around the traditional cricketing schools. And also to avoid this perception, you need also to change the selection panel. I remember it was in 2009, 2010, where for the first time in the Northern Cricket Union history, I appointed a Black African selection panel to oversee under 13 trials. Why is it so significant? Remember now, those top schools are coming to scout players at those trials. So they'll go there and say, you come to my school, this is what will happen to you. So now to navigate and make sure that there's fairness in the process and that there's no manipulation in the selection, I brought people that they didn't know. Yes, you will take flack to say now, who are these guys? Do they know cricket? But later on, when you realize most of those cricketers actually ended up playing professional cricket, because the guys that were there were just more or less evaluating people on performance. So Mr. Ali's sentiments, definitely it's views that you find that some of the issues that have happened in the past, and most recently as Cricket South Africa, we embarked on a schools review. We're independent people, and I think Mr. John O'Connor is a well-renowned individual within the school circuit as well in the sporting world, where he was heading up this committee. And party to that was to make sure that he oversees and check all our school system processes, from a governance perspective to competitions to anything else that goes with it. And so that we are able to ensure that things of what Mr. Ali is saying are not happening, so that there's policies in place as well in relating to that.
I think what is also missing in that statement, that these players come from your Model C schools, is the following. Some of them get to be recruited by the Model C, taking them from where there's no infrastructure, and bring them to the Model C, and as a result of that, they get to be selected. And that is how most of them who testified here, they were in the townships.
Correct.
So they get bursaries to go to the Model C schools.
And that's still one avenue of bringing cricketers through, because the access to good infrastructure and all this also still lies there. So the point that you're making will be like a guy like Kadiso Mulefe, who comes from Orange Farm. Orange Farm doesn't have a cricket infrastructure. But through the development program and identification, he got identified there to say this man has talent. And then he got taken to one of the schools here in Joburg on a bursary. But the issue which is very vital, when you look at the personal circumstances of him, he would never would have ended up and playing for SA Under 19, for example, if he would have remained in Orange Farm, because he would have been fighting the issue of quality of infrastructure and things like that. But that's the one element where you find that you need to look into. But again, the greater scheme of things will be touched on in detail when I speak about the programs.
Let's get there, though, because I think this is an important part of your evidence. You set out in fair amount of detail some of the interventions that Cricket South Africa introduced to improve transformation and also to address issues relating to lack of facilities, for example, issues relating to lack of affordability to buy kit to become a decent batsman. And you've couched that under the headings investment in framework coaches, focus school program, cricket hubs, and regional performance centers. I'm not going to dictate to you in what order you discuss that. All of that may very well be important, and feel free to discuss it and to relay the information contained under those headings to us.
Thanks, Chair. I think what is very important is that back in 2012, there was a research that was done, commissioned by Mr. Van which I think Andrew Preske from Araka referred to, about Marian Duff in relation to development and all that. Well, the outcome of that research actually necessitated us as well, when we did that component, to be able to see how we can actually transform South African cricket. And I must thank the board of the time and under the CEO, Mr. Logard at the time, for actually giving us a listening ear post that research. Because we realized that we cannot rely on the one source of cricket pathway, meaning the elite schools only. We needed to start trying to make sure that we transform and broaden the base. And we've identified, I'll highlight 5 key programs, and then I'll get you into the details of these 5 key programs. One is the Focus Schools program, which is linked up to a school quality index. The school quality index is that all the schools play cricket around the country. They get measured against the school quality index. So the elite schools that we're speaking about, for example, that have been bringing up players in the past, they will be classified probably, let's say, if they don't assist CSA in the transformation agenda, they cannot get to the 90% on the school quality index and be recognized as a blue chip school by Cricket South Africa and the activities of driving cricket. So now the issue which is very vital is that before I get into the details, I'll speak about the remodeled hubs in RPC, because that's one of the key issues, because in the past we used to call what we had a central places center, and we needed to convert that into hubs in RPC. And I'll give you a bit of a background and the injection that went into that. And into that as well, you had to look at the provincial academy system.
Dabas, yeah. Yeah.
Good.
You can carry on.
Are we good to go?
So, Chair, the provincial academy system was earmarked to make sure that all these guys that will be coming through school program now, all the hubs and RPC, and they've been identified as talent, they needed to go to some sort of a system where there's a dual career approach for them while they're pursuing their ambitions of playing cricket. But the key also masterstroke we needed to do as well was to bring in what we call a coaching framework. We started appointing coaches at various members, which I'll get into. But the masterstroke will definitely be the player performance plan. So if you give me the time, and I'll take you through each and everything, and you'll see the initiatives in terms of their intent in broadening the base for selection, as well as transforming the sport. Let me start with the Focus Schools program.
Let me just tell you, you have the time, but not all. Yes.
No worries, I'll end my salary after this. In the Focus School program, Chair, these Focus Schools, like I said, we have a school quality index that can detect and tells us where you're classified. So these are the schools where you find that demographically they've changed. And then the profile of that particular environment. But also added to it is where there's low-hanging fruit. So Umlazi Comtech in KZN will be a focus school. Why is it a focus school? There's a hub next to it. Education and cricket goes hand in hand. Because for us to produce well-rounded individuals, we need to make sure that we look at all those issues collectively. And normally when we identify the schools, there's also has to speak to the CSA strategy that there's a link. And most of these focus schools, like I said, the demographic profile of the school is more than 70% if it's in an urban area. If it's in a township like in Prestige, in Hammanskraal or Umlazi Comtech or Queen's High School, for example, is completely Black African. And normally these schools will have infrastructure, but they've lost their appetite in cricket. And so as Cricket South Africa, what we do, we see this as a low-hanging fruit. So we normally get involved with our members and we start making interventions. And most of these interventions, they're smaller issues. It could be refixing infrastructure at the school, getting someone dedicated to probably drive cricket back again, because they can assist us in our transformation agenda. And also the issue sometimes you find that you just have to provide equipment or even encourage them to play more cricket. Because the challenging thing that we pick up is that some of the schools will play 6 matches a year. And it's not significant amount of matches to actually deliver a provincial cricketer at member level. So as CSA,
Can I just stop you there, Mr. Kuza? You make an important point that some of these schools play 6 games a year. But if you have to compare that to what the elite cricketing schools are playing, how many games are we talking of?
No, Aslam, I think an average cricketer, where I was when I was working with a member, a kid from Mamelodi will play 6 matches a year. If he's lucky, he's selected for the provincial teams, he might end up maybe playing 13 matches. And then for a guy who's at the traditional cricketing school, you're speaking anything between 35 to 50 matches a year. And those issues even go to honours boards. And hence, it gives me a point where I need to speak about the hubs and RPCs. Because the significant game changer for us was to say, we're going to convert this central places center and convert them into hubs and RPC. The only way we're going to do that is to put measures in place. One, we needed to have quality coaches employed in that program. Because what used to happen when we used to run Central Places Center, you develop a coach, he's good for the community, and all of a sudden, he also wants to be better. So he applies for jobs at traditional schools and he goes and coaches there. Now you need to reinvent the wheel. So we needed to make sure that we retain quality coaches. So CSA had to invest in the hubs and RPC program to try and make sure that, one, we bring up quality coaches that are in there. To get to these hubs and RPC, it was not an easy exercise, Chair. I'm proud to say I visited 96 places around the country that were called Central Places Center. Myself and my colleague, Mr. David Mokoponela. I know each and every one of them. I take photos every time when I go, because what I normally do is to compare the previous visit versus the current visit if things are deteriorating and all that. So when we came back and we look at all these 96 places, definitely we are sitting currently with 69 of them, of which 57 are hubs and then 12 are RPCs. This is a significant cash injection. Remember, in the past, in the Central Places Centre, the members were only getting, let's say, an average 800,000 to develop cricket in those communities. With this re-engineered system, it meant that that one area or one hub is going to get a significant amount of money, meaning they can employ a coach, a minimum of 2 assistant coaches, and also have money for transport, facility maintenance, and all the likes to run administration. What the hub is, Chair, in a simple term, it's a facility in a community surrounded by the schools. So the criteria to be a hub is that you need to have a minimum of 4 primary schools playing cricket, because that would have been guys that are playing KFC mini cricket automatically. And then you also have to have a high school structure. And who facilitate the hub of activities is a management structure. That management structure will consist of the coach that has been appointed to run cricket programs, the high school representative of the schools that play area league cricket, the primary schools representative that runs primary school cricket, and as well as the KFC mini cricket program. Because our numbers don't lie, we have a greater participation of kids when it comes to mini cricket. But when it has to be a point of transitioning to hardball, it becomes a problem because of lack of infrastructure. So what we did with these hubs is to start an area league format. And then what they do, the coaches, they will identify the talent. And that talent, if that school is not good enough to play in the mainstream school league on their own, they will affiliate the hub team to play in the main schools league. And the issue which is very vital is that now there's a huge significant criteria that we put to this hub. Not every age group, boys or girls, have to play a minimum of 20 matches a year. Which means if I'm an identified player, I'll play my 20 matches at the hub against traditional schools or leagues in that whatever format, because if you haven't played your 20 matches and there's no reasons around rained out matches and things like that, you failed in the process, because we realize if we close the match gap, we probably will be able to produce significant youngsters that can actually attain and play cricket at the top level. I think the issue which is very vital is that these hubs, you find that these schools act as a feeder system to make sure that there's access to those that don't have infrastructure. Historically, it's well documented that the schools in the township don't even have a space where you find that you can build this infrastructure. So we couldn't sit back and say that school doesn't actually deserve to play cricket. The only level they could play would have been a KFC mini cricket program. Hence the hubs in RPC were so important for us.
But one of the complaints, Mr. Khoza, was that these hubs are not strategically placed. As a result, people don't have access to them. And even where they have access, communities are not asked where to put these hubs. You decide as CSA that you are going to have a hub here, and then it becomes a white elephant.
Chair, I beg to differ with that. And I need to speak about my earlier statement. I visited 96 places around the country. Out of these 96, we're sitting with 57 hubs and 12 regional performance centers. Now, when you look at these hubs and the model itself, remember, these were 96 places, this is where our members were running development programs. So throughout the years when we get to facilities, you'll see that this is where some of the investment was made by Cricket South Africa in establishing other infrastructure and all that. But the issue which is very vital is that that hub cannot happen. Because remember, it's a community activity. I'll speak about where I come from in Mamelodi. The hub there has an after issues as around cricket. The elderly is there. They come in the morning to exercise and be able to also as well have their own meetings and all that, and it's been used as a community event. You'll get the same thing when you go to Mdantsane in East London, where there's a daycare center close by and the kids have access to some of these issues, because our intention was always to make this a community event that is not only just a cricket-oriented issue. And why it's so important that it's a community, we also have to plug the element of education into it. Some of them have the support of a school in the box initiative. So during the week, because again it comes back to us producing well-rounded individual, some of these kids are getting maths lessons and English lessons through a tutor based on an additional program to some of these hubs. Because we firmly believe that these kids mustn't wait for that bursary and whatever to change their educational circumstances. We can change it through cricket, through some of these activities. So now, what that gives us, and you can see that when some of these kids were actually selected for the various representative teams, and we're not blowing our trumpet here. The issue is that there's still a lot of work to be done. But since the hubs and RPCs we've introduced in 2016, 2017, 19 model, when we looked at everything, in 2016, the hubs alone, they produced like 138 players that went and played for the various provincial age group teams. The following year, that moves to 258. Now remember, Chair, someone is losing out when you start making indents on these numbers because you're transforming the game. Because why? The kids that you've identified here, they're getting regular coaching. They're playing more matches. That means they're getting better. Which means now all of a sudden when they go to trials, they're better prepared than when they were playing 6 matches. So now someone who's in the Model C, school for example, being black, which maybe classify myself as middle class, where they find that my kid might be going to a school in town, where they have access to infrastructure. Because my kids were maybe black and have an exposure to cricket, they probably would have easily been selected into teams probably in the past, based on what their level of exposure and the infrastructure that they're in. But what we did in this juncture, we started seeing, hang on, we are making significant strides here. The numbers we're hitting, but the important thing is now to start adding into performance. And Chair, that's where the player performance plan comes in, because if I have to conclude the numbers, in 2018, there were 266 players that went to the National Age Group Weeks, boys and girls. And in 2019, that's the last year before COVID hit us, we had 336 players. Now, why am I highlighting this is that we also measure the quality of opportunity that they get, the quality of performance that they put up, not only at the hub, also at national level. Because if we want to broaden the base, we need to make sure that we're intentional about it. So we realize that there's a significant difference between a kid who's in a Model C school. Remember, the kid in the Model C school has access. One, he gets coaching at the school. Secondly, he gets good infrastructure. Thirdly, his parents can afford to take him for private lessons, which means he's actually on the front foot every time. He lives cricket on a daily basis. And we needed to make sure that we have a plan that can counter some of these issues. And that's
Mr. Khoza, I think that's an important issue that I just want you to elaborate on further. Prior to the introduction of the hubs and the RPCs, a kid from Lenasia, Soweto, Alex would play cricket how many times a week?
He will play at least 6 matches to 8 in a year.
Okay.
Not even a week.
And how much coaching would they get?
That will happen on an ad hoc basis, and that's why the investment on having coaches on a full-time basis needed to happen. And when we did it initially, it was on a small amount, and when we started seeing the results of the coaches, we actually went to the board and asked for more money to say we need to pay these guys more because we believe in this thing. And for us to retain them, it has to be that whether I'm from Soweto or Umlazi or Etucho, I must have a coach who's equipped to bring my talents through. And that's one of the key issues that we had to do.
And let's then compare that to a kid that goes to an elite Model C or private school, gets some private coaching at their parents' expense. How many games a week would they be playing?
I mean, there you're speaking about, at an average, 3 days of coaching and 2 days of match exposure at school level, let alone his private coach. So that's an addition. And now, if you want to see the discrepancies, and that's why the player performance plan was so significant for us, because you don't want the kid to arrive there and you find that he cannot compete and be able to give the necessary output to be making sure that he feels he belongs. We needed to find an avenue that let's get them game ready. Let's give them the coaching and all those type of issues. And Chair, just before I get into the player performance plan, there's also unintended consequences. Because not only black schools or black townships that actually play those number of matches of 6. I mean, Corey will remember the 1 year we still had the CSA T20 schools. Where in Limpopo, there's a school in Mokopane. It's a white school. That school also plays 6 matches a year. But you had 2 cricketers there that wanted to play more cricket. White players. And they went to the hub, because the hub is 5 kilometers away from the town in Mokopane. And they asked if can we join this hub team for the CSA T20. And then the hub guys, they said, okay, fine, you can join in, but we're going to ask permission to say, can you play in our team? Because these kids are coming in with a genuine intent of playing cricket, and they're white players. Their school only plays 6 matches. And the key issue there is that the unintended consequences that I'm speaking about, they were allowed to play. But as it tells you, the more that hub team started winning, getting into a semi-final stage, as adults will start questioning, why are the white players in this hub team? And why are they playing in all those type of issues? Forgetting that, Chair, it's quite significant that I'm an administrator for cricket. And it's for all races, for that fact. And I need to make sure wherever possible that fair, equal opportunities are presented to all. And that's why when you come across those type of issues, it humbles you. Because we tend to think that the person, when they walk in, they're privileged already, but it's not. So in the player performance plan, Chair, we are addressing 5 key issues, and those are close to where societal issues are also affecting the development sport in the country. We are addressing socio-economic status. We are addressing the issue of equipment. We are addressing the issue of one-on-one coaching, which means it's coaching interventions. We are addressing the issues around psychology. We're also addressing the issue of fitness, because for you to be able to be a well-rounded, high-performance athlete, you need support in all those spheres. You know, Chair, when you do these things, you get hit by reality. We got an independent company, Met Foundation, to do this needs assessment. Because in this needs assessment, we also needed to deal with the socio-economic issues of the parents. Because I cannot look at you and say you're black, that means you cannot afford it. No, we needed to do a thorough study so that the benefactors of this program are actually the needy ones. So in this program, we're assisting kids that are coming from households that are earning less than 30,000 rand a month. Because cricket is a very expensive sport. So if you come from a family, whether a boy or girl, coming from that environment, you're an identified cricketer, we have to do a thorough needs assessment on you and support you accordingly in relation to the gaps that will assist you in performing. Let alone we didn't know. And this was a shocking thing for me as a cricket administrator. More than 60% of the 1,200 cricketers that we evaluated, they come from households that are living on state grants. I need to repeat that, Chair. Out of 1,200 cricketers that we evaluated, 60% of them are living from households that are earning from state grants. Must we tell that kid to say your dream of playing cricket is done and buried, and we're not going to make interventions on that? Because when we picked him up at mini cricket, which is an easy expense sport, whatever, you could see that this kid has some skill and potential. And the issue which is very vital for us is that you sit with this stat and you realize, hang on, you actually know more about what's happening out there than what meets the eye. Because, you know, a kid arrives at 2 o'clock at practice at the hub or RPC. You don't know whether he's eaten or not if you're not doing some of these issues. And the challenging thing that you find out over time is that we had to make significant changes. I mean, some of the household, Chair, we sit with a parent, a grandmother in Osore. And that's why the hubs and RPCs are so significantly important. But they get valued differently depending on which member you're sitting with. So in SWD, they don't have a strong school quality system. So these hubs are actually their feeder into the process. Where if you come to Joburg, most of the people can afford and whatever, and access becomes a lot easier. Sometimes we find that there might be a bit of an underplaying to say, let's wait to Lenasia, that access type of a thing. So it's quite important for me to highlight the following issues. Chair, this program is close to my heart because it addresses the real issues. Chair, there's a youngster, Monampile Jansen, in the Northern Cape. Good quality cricketer. When he was coached at the age of 13, and the coach is speaking to him, he realized over numerous times, because we appointed this coaching framework to facilitate certain coaching regular sessions, that every time when I speak to this kid, sometimes he hears me and sometimes he doesn't. So they phoned me, Chair, and said, we have a bit of an issue. We think we need to take this guy in to go and probably put into a ear specialist to go and check him. When they said, go ahead, and they went ahead and they took him for an assessment. Let alone, that's the real cricketing issues that you deal with. Because now, as much as he shows potential on the cricketing field, here's a kid who found out was in the process of losing hearing. The background to him, his parents have passed on. He lives with his aunt in a shack. And here, now, all of a sudden, for us to remedy the process was going to be a 100,000 rand exercise to try and correct the dysfunctionality of the year. I didn't even have to consult my principals to get authority. We gave authority on the spot. Because Monapule Jansen, if one day he ever plays for South Africa, he probably would be the greatest cricketer we've ever produced. Why? Because we've given him a hearing back, which he didn't have. Because, Chair, the sad part was when we went to the school where he goes, and we asked them whether were you aware that this guy has an ear deficiency and he was losing hearing, they said to us, we thought he was one of those naughty boys that didn't want to listen. Those are the real issues that are facing people on the ground. And Chair, you finish off the ear operation. Now you need to reintegrate this guy into society. Now you realize, hang on, if this kid was losing hearing, and he's probably 14 years old at the time, how much of schooling has he really have? We had to take him to a school like EduBlocks, where they could actually do a test on him to see where is he, whether do we need any remedial intervention. If Monapule Jansen walks through that door, Chair, and speaks to you now, in English, and the confidence and everything, and I have to show you back then before the interventions, it's two different individuals. And that's what the power of this program allowed us to do. The other issue that we don't, it speaks to the societal issues. I mean, we're trying to develop women's cricket here. We get these results back. The independent company says we need to have a separate discussion with you and your management team before we share the results. We have some serious flags that have been flagged when we did the assessment of the female. Chair, you just want to run cricket, but you also need to ensure that you don't run away from the societal issues. The stuff that came out of the women assessments, predominantly some of them had domestic violence around it, abuse issues. And the sad part is, one of the two players was actually at the high risk of committing suicide. And at that point, when we were given the report, I said, you didn't even have to wait to give me the report. That's a SOS. You need to make intervention. We don't have to know who the cricketer is as a cricket system, but you must go and give that player the necessary support and the attention. So, Chair, the thing is, it's very important when we look at all these programs that the PLAF performance plan says it needs more cash injection into it. Because, like I've said, the cricket equipment is very expensive. But if you want to close the gap, it goes also with interventions on coaching and all that. And some of the coaches that we've appointed, because remember, through this player performance plan, you also have access to experts that can come in and add more to these youngsters on an ad hoc basis. And it's very important for us to be able to roll out these processes correctly.
Now, there was the evidence you talked about relevant to hubs. Now, you will have heard that there were two conflicting views about a particular hub, and that's the one in Khayelitsha. There was evidence that it was a white elephant, clear that there had been no consultation, this, that, and the next thing. And then there was evidence from a leader in the Western Cape who said, no, that was, you were misled. If anything, that hub is fully functional. Now, I sense that you have your you have got your finger on the pulse. What from your administrator position is in fact the position with regard to that particular hub?
So from the onset, if it was a white elephant, it wouldn't be funded under me. Because these hubs in RPC, they do monthly reports. And in the monthly reports that they submit via their provincial office to CSA, there's a few issues that have been highlighted in that report. One is the expenditure, because we also need to track. Before I go to the finance office and say, are we spending our money where it needs to be? Those are the checks and balances that we also need to have. The second issue is around making sure that they play matches. So now, normally, guys, if you want to be malicious, you can send us that report and say, I've played 20 matches, we've won or lost or whatever. We have an electronic system where you find that you have to log in results. Now take your report and balance it against that. So if that match doesn't appear there, how did it end up in your report? So Chair, for me, is that assertion is malicious, and I'll kick it to touch in that regard, because there's no way where I will allow CSA money, while knowing that there's a desperate need out there, that it gets used in that fashion, where you find that it's a white elephant.
Are you saying that there are games being played in Khayelitsha?
Correct. And funny enough, Chair, one of the head coach of Khayelitsha appeared here at SJN.
Yeah, that's why I say they were conflicting.
Correct.
There was conflicting evidence. The one was saying, that is how you white an elephant.
And those are some of the issues. So what tends to happen as well, when people speak about certain things, you get hidden under the collar, but you also need to understand from what perspective is he speaking from. Because remember, this gentleman was one of the first coaches we appointed to run this hub system at the time from a Western Province perspective. So also is, when he came and spoke here, and I must tend to be correct, he was speaking about his experiences not from a hub perspective, because he ended up being employed at the hub. Because in his journey of cricket, he became a selector for the Western Province teams and other issues. So sometimes it's very important to balance this out. And Chair, I must also state, if the hub is not delivering the results that we're intending to achieve, we're not charging. We understand the investment that needs to be made in the communities, but we are in a result driven and we need to see a return on investment. So as much as we're serious as Cricket South Africa or our members, we also need the people that are running this program to be serious. And we fired people before through our members for not delivering the results that we need.
Mr. Koza, when it comes to the coaches of these hubs, can you give us a demographic profile of the coaches?
Chair, if you had to look at the demographics of the coaching system in South Africa in controlled positions of influence by Cricket South Africa, that will speak to professional cricket, that will speak to the hubs and RPC, it will speak to coaching framework. We are over 90% black in terms of demographic profile. So those are some of the significant strides that we've made, because the picture in the past would have been different. And remember, some of these coaching framework guys are actually in charge of the destiny of the province when it comes to looking after the best tier of either white or black players. So now we've appointed them to be full-time coaches to drive this player performance plan. That once we've identified you as a identified player, they need to make sure that all your performance gaps have been looked after. And we couldn't do that with the old system of relying on a teacher who has a job and all those type of issues. So we have to make sure that they're in control, influence positions, that the right people are appointed. And so significantly it results that 90% of those positions, over 90% is black people.
If we are 90% black, why did we end up with Mark Boucher?
So, that question of Mark Boucher, it's above my pay grade. Okay. But so I know I'm acting capacity at the moment, but that is above my pay grade. But I think Mr. Politi Museki will deal with that. Yeah.
Okay. You've spoken glowingly about the hubs and the RPCs, but I think it will be useful for you to share with us, as you did in the written submission in paragraph 136, how much CSA has spent on the hub system, the hubs and the RPCs, sorry.
Chair, I must say, when we were at the Central Places Center, the budget was around about 12 million that went into these underprivileged areas to develop cricket. And since 2015, remember, you had to employ coaches and have access to transport, make sure that they meet this minimum requirement you're putting up about matches. The budget has gone over 30 million. Where we are at the current financial year, we're spending about 35 million, going to this 69 places, which are 12 RPCs and 57 regional performance centers.
Is that separate from money spent on building or improving facilities?
No, it's not. You have to, and this is where I think, so it's quite important also to qualify the budgets under CSA. Because the budget under CSA, there's various levels of cricket programs. So there will be a KFC element, which is very important, which is sponsored by KFC itself. And so now that's where we breed the players. And most recently, while the SJN is on, you'll see that we've also introduced what we call meso cricket. Because meso cricket is aimed at where there's infrastructure challenges. We can piggyback on this KFC and plug in the players in there. Then you'll have what we call club cricket. And in there, for example, there'll be different allocation of funding. And I think I've sat here and I listened to various people speak and I realized, hang on, I must go back to the drawing board and re-explain some of these budgets. We use a pot calculation formula to arrive to what the member needs to get, looking at their magnitude and the impact thereof. And then on top of it, we have what we used to call the transformation fund. And in the transformation fund, we had budgets as well to make intervention on existing infrastructure where you found that we needed to improve certain aspects. But over time, there has been legacy projects. I think predominantly this thing seems to follow the major events. I think in 2003, we hosted the ICC World Cup. And partly to that, there were various infrastructures that were actually developed and actually benefited from this process. And most of them are listed in my affidavit in terms of who actually got infrastructure then. But the key issue to note is building an infrastructure, that's the easy part. Maintenance of that infrastructure is what's very important. And that's why I still made my point earlier on before we adjourned for lunch, that 65% of this infrastructure that we develop in cricket on is owned by the municipalities. And the issue which is very vital, in the past it was easy to get the support in terms of maintenance, but as the societal issues started changing, it becomes a bit of a challenge for some of these places to actually be maintained to the right level. And the challenge that we're sitting with, it's actually necessitated CSA as well to get into a collaborative agreement with the Department of Education as well as Sports and Rec. We realize that we might not get access to money, but at least that buy-in to be able to allow us access in key instrumental institutions that can allow us to make those interventions. Because if that infrastructure that we built it from 2003 legacy to where we are now doesn't continuously being maintained, we're fooling ourselves. I mean, we cannot develop and change the space. And lastly, Chair, on the infrastructure issue, the maintenance of it speaks to the quality of cricketer that you produce. And I need to use a simple example of a sponsor that we got 5 years ago is Cricket South Africa, which was Kimek JCB. Kimek JCB, they're producing rollers to prepare infrastructure. When they decided to come and sponsor CSA, they'll say, we'll donate rollers to your previously disadvantaged communities. And we initially at the onset, we donated one in Hammanskraal. And so the average score of a match in Hammanskraal at the time would have been run about 140, 160 before this new equipment arrived to roll the pitch. But funny enough, from the onset, the minute the sponsorship roller arrived there, we started seeing a significant improvement on the scores, which means now all of a sudden the 160, 140 became a 240, 260. What results into that player that was getting a 40 is now getting an 80 or 100, which tells you that if the kids are playing in good, prepared infrastructure, we should be able to bring them through. But unfortunately is that most of our kids, and predominantly or previously disadvantaged ones, are still being faced with that issue of playing in substandard surfaces. Hence, it has been easier historically probably to produce them as bowlers rather than as batters because there's no records or good performances to speak from. But what gives me encouragement is that, which is very important that we didn't mention in my affidavit, when we started introducing when we started realizing that we're producing bowlers, we needed to also start producing batters. And we started making an intervention, and we set the target within target at school level for provincial age group teams that in the first, in the top 6 of any batting team, from under 13 right until under 19, that they earmark for black African cricketers. Chair, we were criticized for that. But when you look at that in hindsight, after the fact, I'm quite encouraged by what is coming through. Because some of the players that played in the CSA T20 are the product of that intervention. Because if they were never given an opportunity to play in those positions of batting, because remember, again, it comes back to the selection issue. Because of that perception of black players being bowlers, you ask yourself how many of them actually were overlooked from a batting component because they were coming from substandard infrastructure and everything. So sometimes we make policies to try and take the game forward, but there's also unintended consequences. So what the other guys would do, CSA wants us to play 2 black Africans, it's okay. We'll throw one up front, we'll open the batting, and they will go out quickly, and then we'll be able to continue from there. Those are the issues that we picked up in year 1. We went back and said, this cannot happen in this way. Where was this opening bowler, or opening batsman? Where was he playing from where you identified him? So all of a sudden, when you see that at school, he's batting number 9, but for the provincial team, he bats at number 1. How did that come to fruition? And that, Chair, is an issue where you needed to educate the cricket system. And you needed to ensure that the consensus of coaches must understand that we might be sitting at head office, but we do scrutinize performances. And to that detail of where we can link it up to where you've been identified from. Because I cannot say you must come through as a batter and you're not playing as a batsman at your own school. And those are or even at the hub for that matter.
Mr. Khoza, it seems to me from what you're saying that at head office level there's a sophisticated monitoring system so that if talented black kids are not coming through the system, despite them performing at school level or club level, that is something you can pick up.
Correct. I think, Chair, we have also, during that process, developed what we call measuring the quality of performance opportunity that are given to players. Because it's one thing to say I'm playing them in a team, but it's another thing that you find that if you're not giving them the opportunity in the rightful space where they've been identified and been prepared for, those are the issues that you pick up. And these issues, Chair, speaks to both professional domestic cricket as well as our development program. Because this quality of opportunity index was quite fundamentally important for us, so that when we have discussions with coaches, I'll use one of the professional players without actually mentioning a name here, is that when we did the assessment, we realized, hang on, this guy has batted in 3 different positions in one competition. So 1 minute he's opening, next minute he's batting at 6, next minute he's batting at 8. If my intent is to bring such a player through, there must be a clearly role-defined position. Because unless if this guy is not good enough, then I mustn't waste his time and contract him and put him in the process. Because the point departure of a contracting should be, what is the role that this guy is going to fulfill for me? And on top of that, if the player has shortcomings, you also have what we call a performance development plan. Because in a performance development plan, you need to assess, okay, I want this guy to probably bat at number 1 for me. And his problem maybe might be the strike rate. How am I coaching him to try and get to that strike rate? And it doesn't become an event. It becomes a coaching and a discussion in the process. And unfortunately, those are the issues that you find that we have to still continue massaging and improving the South African cricket system on. Because the bigger picture tells you, if there's attention to detail and the efforts have been made, you do get results.
Mr. Khoza, I think we've spent enough time on all of those interventions. Can we move on now to paragraph 141, where you deal with the intervention that was introduced to ensure a selection panel that is more independent?
Sure, it's very unfortunate that Mr. Vusaji takes me to a painful experience. I think in 2019, I was fortunate enough to go to England and watch the World Cup final. But unfortunately, the Proteas were not there. They were knocked out in the round-robin stages. And a party to that, some of the key learnings to that poor performance necessitated us to probably look at our system. And so what do we need to change to actually move forward? And when you look at it, is that now we also had to look at now the issue around the director of cricket at the time, because he came in post the 2019 performance. Because prior to that effect, normally the Protea team would be reporting directly to the CEO or the board. They will deal with the national team affairs and all that. So from 2019, we were trying to operationalize the Protea team into the Cricket Services Department, which is the department that I'm in. Then one of the key recommendations was to say, now we need a chief independent medical officer. Because remember now, the team has a team doctor. And sometimes the issue of having a team doctor also being the one who passes the players. If they've been there over time, you start doubting certain issues to say, are they still checks and balances and things like that. But be as it may, one of the improvements and recommendations from that debacle of the World Cup performance necessitated us to have an independent chief medical officer. What the chief medical officer would do, the convener of selectors will write to him to say, we have a series coming up, and these are the players that we're looking to select. And he will engage with the strength and conditioning leads, which in turn speaks to strength and conditioning coaches of the professional teams to ascertain the fitness and everything else of everybody. And I think using the word sophisticated, we also have an injury monitoring system as well, that way all these issues are reported into. So what the chief medical officer would do, we'll give the thumbs up to the convener and say, based on the numbers of people that you've given me, all of them are okay. Or this guy has an issue. He cannot be considered for selection. Because that independency was very important. Because that also was one of the issues that came out of the recommendations of how we can improve the system. And then the other one was the appointment of the convener of selectors. Remember, previously, we would appoint people even though they would have been on an independent contract. But cricket was not their day-to-day job. And then we will appoint these guys for different levels. So there will be a convener of selectors for SA Under 19. There will be a convener of selectors for the women. There will be a convener of selectors for the Protea men. But when you want accountability, now you need to speak to 3 different figures, and you're speaking about one pathway. So what CSA did was that they made the position of convener of selectors a fixed-term position. And that convener is responsible for all selection matters, whether men or women. And that's so that we can hold someone accountable. The job of the convener of selectors is simple. It's easy to select a team for now, but we have other major events coming up in 3 years or maybe 4 years or 5 years' time. Do we have actually enough resources for us to be competitive at that particular time? So it needs to actually look at the short-term and a long-term strategy. And so those are some of the key issues that we needed to make sure that we look at. And that position of a convener of selectors was so very important, because remember now, the people that will select the team would be now the head coach of the team in consultation with the convener of selectors, and we also just brought one independent member. But again, like I said, that draft policy, with all our shenanigans as Cricket South Africa, because it's actually, you can see maybe it's at a distance, my beard is slightly grey, but the issue which I want to qualify is that the policy that we're speaking about actually was tabled for the first time through the Cricket Committee last month or 2 back for the board to approve, because previously it has been in a draft format for a couple of years because of when we wanted to take it through previous committee, then things happened, and then we had an interim board which also didn't want to make and put the stamp on while they're interim. And so that's where we are in terms of formalizing some of the issues.
Just however, to clarify, that doesn't mean that there's no policy in place at the moment.
Correct.
As I understand it, there was a policy in about 2014 that was adopted.
Correct.
And I think Mr. Manak gave evidence about that.
Correct.
And what you're dealing with is now changes to that policy.
Correct.
In order to try to improve the transformation imperatives.
Correct. And I think what is also quite important was communication to players. And it's one area that we probably, in our affidavit, we were stating about the process, and we need to be intentional that there's no mixed messages. Why players are being left out and the reasons behind, because all those issues has to speak to this personal development plans and our intentions and strategies of where we're heading to. You cannot be in a position where there's mixed messages. So that's why it was quite important to have someone who speak about selection and players in relation to and communicate as well with the players in that regard. So that if there's a problem, I don't have to make 4 different phone calls to different individuals. We can go directly to the individual.
Mr. Koza, let's now go to the question of facilities that were either built or improved by CSA. Again, in the interest of time, I'm not going to go through the whole of 144 to 151, but I do think it's important for you to take us through 147 and 148, because there has been a suggestion that CSA develops facilities without consideration of whether the facility is going to be used or whether it's going to end up like a white elephant or be vandalized.
Chair, we have a geocoding specialist in our office. And the geocoding specialist has to put up our footprint around the country, because that footprint is so fundamentally important, linked to how we can develop and strategize the game moving forward. So now, when we make a call on infrastructure, you have to go and look at proximity, accessibility, all those type of issues that goes with it. And the key issue here to note is that normally all those facilities that were earmarked for all this, there's either primary schools and things like that that are feeding into these areas and element. So that geocoding specialists say, since we've had them, they actually identify also low-hanging fruits for us. Because we started applying our minds to around, sometimes we have infrastructure, but it's underutilized. So allow me to use the University of the North in Limpopo. Chair, around the university, there's 9 primary schools that are playing actively KFC mini cricket program. But they cannot transition into hardball because of lack of infrastructure. But when you take it to the other side, you go to the university. The university plays club cricket, and they play over weekends. There is a low-hanging fruit for us to actually collaborate the community and the university so that kids can transition into headball by making sure that they can have access during the week. So some of the challenges that we're sitting with is also about how do we maximize the utilization of the existing infrastructure that we're sitting with. And the issue which is very vital is that there's no way you can go and build infrastructure where you find that it doesn't benefit the community. Yes, we must also admit that maybe some of the legacy projects that we wanted to do, they were built with good intent. But because of the other issues of vandalism and other issues, the infrastructure had to deteriorate. And I've learned it from a personal experience. We built the Mamelodi Oval on the rubbish dump. And it was a walking path for the community. The minute we built a cricket field and we started putting fencing, we couldn't understand why people keep on cutting the fence. Until the day we decided to put gates and allowed people to continue with that walking trail and path, when we never had any vandalism around the perimeters of the infrastructure. The key issue also is when you build this infrastructure, and it has to be community, it has to have access to the community, because through cricket, we can empower so many. And that's why I've given my examples earlier on. But the issue here is, categorically speaking, you have to apply some of the tools that you have at your disposal to make a meaningful impact to cricket development. And that's why the identification of these people. I mean, if I had to bring a bit of a rough sketch, if we even calculating, for example, from that school to that facility, what is the walking distance? How long will it take? Is it safe for the kid to be able to do that? Do we have to provide transport and all those type of issues? Where if you say we were shooting in the dark, the lot of Northern Cape is a desert. And I remember vividly in our footprint, there's an area where they play KFC cricket. Now it's one school, somewhere in the desert. Now, if you go and put infrastructure there, how is that school, who are they going to play against? Which is also going to bring back again the issue of transport and other challenges, because they will have to travel over 300 km to get to the next school. And those are some of the issues that I can categorically state, say that the infrastructure that we're speaking about is definitely accessible.
You said, sorry.
Yeah. I'm not sure if you were going to go there. There's a list under paragraph 150 of the facilities. Aren't you sometimes maybe doing this over concentration of facilities in one region or one area and leave out other areas? Let me give you an example. I'm from the Eastern Cape.
Correct.
I see there you've got Forte University, right? you also have the border region. I mean, before the border region, you have East London, Tanzania facility. You've got Masingata Oval, which is in the border region. You've got, again, a Fort higher performance. You've got Ngubela Park facility, Motherwell facility. All these, they are close to your bigger cities. Your East London, your Port Elizabeth, Gqeberha now. Welfort is far from everything. Why is it the case? I know that Eastern Cape is big, but there are areas there which are not covered, and a big area where there is not a single facility.
Chair, there are 26,000 schools in South Africa, over 26,000 schools. And 10,000 of them don't have water or sanitation. 10,000 of them don't even have electricity or fencing. Some of them are faced with real issues of getting access to feeding schemes and all those type of challenges. Now, to come back, and when you look at our footprint, and we criticize ourselves, we say, when you look at our footprint, we are on the N1 and the N2. When we say N1 or N2, is that predominantly it's within that footprint. But that doesn't mean necessarily that we cannot venture out into other elements. When you look at our footprint, you'll realize that in some of those underprivileged and those disadvantaged communities, there's cricket being played. But the only transition that they could make is because of lack of infrastructure, they could not play hardball cricket. So now, as Cricket South Africa alone, we cannot afford to build infrastructure at every corner of this country. It will be my pipe dream to be able to do that. But the issue is we rely on stakeholders out there. And the biggest significant stakeholder to us is the government and the municipalities out there. Because through sport, we can make a meaningful change to society. The other one is definitely the business world out there. Because for us to be able to do this, only from a CSA COFA's perspective, we're wishing other issues. I don't even want to speak about the budget discussions of cutting this and cutting that I go through with my finance department.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay.
You then deal with the impact of fitness assessments, and in the interest of time, I don't want you to go through all of the paragraphs. Just comment on the allegation made by some witnesses that fitness is used merely as an excuse to exclude certain race groups from the national team.
It can be, Chair. You're speaking about a professional environment. And irrespective of whichever 11 runs onto the field, we need to be proud of that. And we need to make sure that they condition to the T. So conditioning of cricketers is a paramount importance of a cricketer. And it's also part of their contracts domestically and as well as the national contract, that you have to adhere to a certain level of fitnesses. So you'll see that we're referring to an attachment that was sent out by Adrian Leroux, who's the lead strength and conditioning coach, as well as Tumi Masekela, who's the pro-tier strength and conditioning coach. Because for you to be recognized and be selected for the pro-tiers, there's benchmarks and minimum standards that needs to be adhered to. So now I know for a fact that there's certain players that have been left out because they didn't match the set criteria. Because this is also part of their contract process. So now to come and say we've been left out because of our color and whatever, or this issue is used as fitness has been used as an excuse, I think the contract speaks for itself, because you have to also perform at a certain level of requirement to meet those minimum standards.
Mr. Khoza, let's now move on to concerns raised by certain of the players. In paragraph 160, in broad terms, you outline some of CSA's efforts to promote transformation. Please take us quickly through that.
I think, Chair, what is very important from the onset is, so CSA always endeavors and wants to continue and improving. I think that's why also this process is so important and the outcomes of it, to try and see how we can improve. Because I think one of the key issues is that we always strive to foster and ensure that we bring a culture of inclusivity and diversity. And I think the issue which is very important, we've always tried to make sure from an administrative perspective, that we set up parameters of inclusion in the process and making sure that people are actually feel safe to be able to participate. But when you listen to the testimonies and all that, you also need to ask yourself whether your efforts are strong enough and watertight to be able to give you what's happening. And just in a nutshell is that we do have what we have as culture camps, for example, where you find that you want to build an environment. I mean, I think the famous tag of the Protea fire has been well documented because it became emanating from the culture, and Mr. Fanselo was part of the process, and then he could elaborate further into it. But the issue about culture, it also has to be a continuous education in the process, because players come in and go. And if you don't have people that actually integrate new players in terms of the processes and the principles of what you're trying to drive, then whatever you're intending to do, you'll have a reset and refresh button every time. But also having leadership in those key environments is key. Meaning your coach, your administrators, your support staff, they need to be aligned to the cause and they need to understand the greater scheme of things. So I think one of the key issues to ensure that, and we look at this hypothetically and then we think, hang on, have we actually approached some of these culture camps, which were so significantly in actually getting us to where we are, from an event-orientated perspective? Couldn't we have done more to continue with the education? Because one of the key issues is that now, like I said, you start well, there's 17 contracted guys, they all go to this camp, everybody buys in. But 5 years down the line, we could be sitting with 6 or 7 new players. I cannot rely on what we did at that particular time. And one of the key issues, I think, as a take-home as well, is to say now, how can we do the Protea culture and also embed it within the South African domestic cricket system? Because automatically these players are being selected from there.
You then talk about surveys and player development plans. Why do you say that has any impact on transformation?
Chair, I think the important thing, the personal development plans, like I've highlighted, are aimed at making sure that the progress of an individual is given the right care. Because we identify you for a specific role, and that role internationally or domestically requires you to perform at a particular level. So now if you find that you have a shortage in terms of your skill and you're not matching up to the benchmark, we cannot lower the domestic or international benchmark to your level. We need to coach you and assist you to the high level. And I think one issue that I'm also looking at is the surveys, because we do survey all the camps. We also survey all the tours, like I've highlighted earlier on. And that's a litmus test of the environment. And some of these issues is very unfortunate that were not implemented prior to 2010, because it would have been interesting, because these surveys are so instrumental. It's not about us only ascertaining what the environment is about. It's also shaping up what type of improved systems we need to put forward, moving forward, to make sure that we have a healthier Protea environment for both men and women.
It's interesting you say that, because my perception from the evidence that has been led is that pre-2010, you had players that had real issues regarding transformation and being excluded on the basis of their race. But post-2010, we don't seem to have received as many complaints. Is that a fair enough assessment?
It's a fair enough assessment, but also, I think one thing I've taken cognizance of as I'm listening to the chair in his opening remarks. He mentioned that he's made also an appeal to the current players to come forward. So I cannot take only and say, hey, the minute the reason that they're not here, everything is okay. It can't be. I need to also go back and actually see how we can improve our system to actually get to the core of where if someone is feeling discomfort about any type of situation, that they're confident enough and believe in the system to come forward.
Bearing that in mind, why do you say the surveys regarding the tours play any role in assisting transformation?
Chair, I think there's twofold. These surveys, besides evaluating the environment, they also ascertain the support given to players in the environment. Because we as administrators are not in the environment. We've hired people to make sure that they facilitate a healthy strategic imperative of what we're trying to achieve. So now when you look at those surveys and you ascertain it back, you look at issues around, is there any coaching issues that have been raised that needs immediate attention and intervention? is there any issues of the discomfort of players regarding logistics and all, because those are the issues, things to fix to make sure that it doesn't happen at the next door. But the issue which is fundamentally important, these surveys are not just a tick box exercise, because they're also at the back end of a personal development plan of the appointed coach at both provincial professional cricket as well as at the international level. Because the issue is when information comes through, they will highlight maybe one of the coaches in the past that his man management challenges as far as the way he runs his team. So now we have to look at that and look at now how do we assist this individual to get better in that aspect. And some of it you find that we're addressing it through formalized courses and things like that if it's not within our domain of the coaching curriculum. Or some of it, or also we do assign mentors to assist people to try and make sure that they can facilitate, because it's not only about the players, but it's also about how we can improve our coaching system and the coaches that are operating the system.
I'm going to take you to paragraph 162 now. We're dealing with Roger Telemarcus's testimony, and his perception is that when he played, there was a clique of senior players that selected the team. What is your take on that?
I think I do respect Mr. Telemarcus. I mean, he's one of the players that has represented the Proteas. And I think the issue of a clique that controls selection may not be entirely true from where I'm sitting because of the selection policy that we have in place. But also the issue which is very difficult for CSA at this point is when it comes to selecting matters, like I said, we rely on the policy and the individuals that are appointed to be able to derive certain issues. But I think what is also important is that now if players influence the coaches from a selection perspective, then there must have been a weakness from a coach who was there at the time or the selector that was there at the time, because the policy prohibits any clique of players or any head coach and all those type of issues, or any captain or whatever, to influence the selection part of it.
You then make a very interesting comment about selection in paragraph 166. Can you please elaborate on that?
I think the issue is selecting is a very contentious issue. And it doesn't matter the sport that you're involved in. You hardly find where all of us are united in the starting 11. And I think one issue that needs to acknowledge is that now when it comes to cricket, there's different views. Because you're not only playing here at home, but you're also playing away. And the strength of the type of combination of players that you might want might differ from one individual. One guy might say, because we're playing in the subcontinent, I want an extra spinner. While the other guy said, no, our 3 fast bowlers have been working for us, let's keep the quick bowlers. And those are some of the issues that you find that you tend to impact the selection, because it's an issue. That's why we normally leave it to the independent people to actually facilitate for us. But we need to just make sure that they're assertive enough, and also that maybe the bridge between them and the players is also brought closer so that there's a better understanding.
You then in paragraph 170 and 171 deal with Mr. Tsolekile's concerns about CSA not doing enough to advance black players. What's your comment to that?
Sure. Again, context is important in the period. Because in the era that Mr. Tsolekile played and all that, and when he made this assertion, and where we are now, there's also a lot of improvement in the system that has happened domestically as well as within the Protea team. And when, for example, you look at our contracting system within the professional setup, you'll start seeing significant improvements in terms of the number of players being contracted of color in the various provincial teams. And some of them are actually also the highest earners in the process of that contracting process. And here we allude to the fact that you could see, for example, the Titans, which are based in Pretoria, has about 11 black players in their squad, which is currently contracted, for example. If you go to the Central Lions, which is here in Joburg, there are 12 black players as well in the squad. And then when you, KZN also speaks for itself, and we're also speaking about what's happening within the EP team. So where we come from and where we are now, There are gains. And Chair, these gains are purely because of the access that is created as well, by not relying only on a few top schools that have actually given us the players before. Because you cannot control the rapid rate of transformation in some of the schools. And some of them are strictly Afrikaans-speaking schools where you can't take an English-speaking kid to such a thing. So this, to me, Chair, is, again, I'm highlighting the improvements that we've made.
In paragraph 174,
You must take African-speaking kids to those African-speaking.
No, don't touch it.
In paragraph 174, you make reference to an article, and I think you do so in response to a contention that Mr. Smith was the person that indicated he was not prepared to play if Tsami Tsolekile was included in the team.
Correct. I think the article speaks for itself, and it is attached as well in there. But the issue, Chair, which I omitted to speak about when we spoke about the selection policy, was the role of the transformation and member relations officer. So
I was trying to find the article.
Chair, if you don't have the article, we'll resend it to you.
Okay.
So, Chair, in the selection process, the key component is that we also remember we have a transformation and stakeholder relations manager who oversees all the processes, because he has to manage and be able to report back to the transformation committee if we are adhering to certain things. And when you look at our policy, part of it is that he also has a responsibility to look into what is the squad being selected or the playing 11. And whether the targets that we've set for ourselves in relation to the EPG, for example, adhering to certain targets, are actually been monitored. So Mr. Jordan is quite an instrumental one as well within the selection processes in terms of making sure that we are adhering to what we're saying we need to do. And if there's questions that you find that maybe we're not meeting certain objectives, he will be able to, is authorized to ask at that particular time the selectors and everybody else. And in most often when we fail to meet, there will always be cricketing reasons around that which he needs to question to be able to satisfy the hierarchy.
Then we get to the Kaya Zondo affair.
Sorry, Mr. Koza, before you get to Kaya Zondo, I just want to go back to Roger Telemachus. Sorry to take you back. In your paragraph 162, you say that there's Mr. Telemachus' perspective that a clique of players controlled selection may not be entirely accurate. What exactly are you or is CSA saying about that? Is CSA aware of the Big Five? Was the Big Five that Mr. Telemachus alluded to, was that ever brought to CSA's attention? If so, if the allegation about the Big Five is true, before finalizing these particular paragraphs, did CSA conduct any sort of investigation to find out who the Big Five members are, and did they control any, or did they have any influence over selection and so forth?
I think my departure point is that, like, if you don't have a governing document to manage your selection, that's going to be the first miss that you're going to make. So now our affidavit is based on the policy that we have in place. The perception and comments of the players, we cannot judge what I've done, but if there hasn't been formally lodged and there's reports, and I think there was a formal issue when you look at the cards on the CSA even actually put a subcommittee to investigate all those issues because it came to the fore. But this one of Mr. Telemachus, unfortunately, from where I'm sitting, and again, we even tried to verify some of the statements he's made. And unfortunately, I do honorably refer to Mr. Gulam Raja, who's passed on, who was the team manager at the time. But unfortunately, we couldn't even go to that extent of asking him in terms of that aspect, because we cannot even verify some of the assertions. But the only thing, my response to you is that I have to have the confidence that the policy was followed in terms of what needed to be done at selection at all times. If there was a click, we don't have any evidence of that.
Okay, but we've heard evidence already, even from Mr. Manek, about how even with policies in place, the policies are not necessarily always adhered to, right? So I'm just wondering now, because if the allegation is true that there was this click of a Big Five, we need to ensure that such a thing doesn't happen again or repeat itself in future. It might not be the case now in the current Protea setup, but like in future, we don't want another Big Five, Big Five individuals organizing themselves again and controlling selection. So I'm just wondering, how do we resolve that? If CSA just comes here and says we can't verify anything.
Remember, for me, so this is at a different period of time. Where we are at this point in time is that things have changed. We have certain mechanisms that we've put in place as well to detect some of the issues. Our relationship with SACA is also at a different level, where you find that if any player cannot even speak to the union themselves and say, I have this issue with CSA, and that's why I say the current players, it's easy to deal with it to a particular degree, because now if there's an incident of a player and the member has taken action against them, I'll hear from SACA to say they're not happy with 1, 2, 3. This is where the environment is and all that. But at the time of Mr. Telemarcus, and that's why I'm saying now, you have to accept that certain things maybe might not have been in place at that particular time to actually bring some of these concerns to the fore. And it's very unfortunate that from where I'm sitting as the cricket administrator, I want to make sure that everybody that comes through cricket has a positive experience. And it was saddening me listening to some of these former players who I regard as my heroes, as I was bringing up, to see that they've went through some of these issues. And unfortunately, like I said, we have to deal with factual information and be able to table factual issues to you.
I think Mr. Manak gave evidence that when he was appointed as a selector, one of the issues he had identified as a problem was that there was no formal selection policy. And he then proposed that there should be such a policy. And that policy, I think, was then prepared and adopted in 2014. Correct. So Mr. Telemarcus may have suffered from the fact that prior to 2014, there were no clear guidelines on who was ultimately responsible for selection.
No, fair enough. And I think that's why I say the important issue is that Mr. Manak he was one of the selectors that we had in the process. And that's why I say all those issues actually lies in those people that we put on our doorstep. But since then as well, like I said, we are actually the selection policy has been adopted, and the one that we're working with, but there's also a draft that is also an improved version of where we're finding ourselves.
Well, just a comment. All these things, you must remember this committee, this structure were not formal. You will not have people who call themselves Big Five.
Yeah.
There will be Big Five by the way in which they behave.
Correct.
And it could also be something that has nothing to do with CSA, but they are so powerful that even the coach can't do anything about it. These things, they do happen. And the fact that they are not reported does not mean that they don't exist. Yes. So I think that's where FUMISA comes from, to say we need to what we need to take out of this is to say, how do you then, if indeed there was a Big Five, how do we avoid those things happening in the future? Yes, as opposed to treat them as if people are coming here to tell us stories. And
I think the important thing, Chair, is that like any other system, we have to evolve. And the gaps, if they are there existing in our processes and our systems, we need to identify as such and see how we can actually, because like I said, our intention is always give people that come through cricket a positive experience. If the experience is not positive, then we need to go back to the drawing board and relook at where are issues happening and why is it happening. And that's why I say some of these camps that we conduct to try and make sure that we can shape up environments and all that, we need to also enhance that process, that it doesn't become event-orientated mentality. It needs to be a continuous education of the process. So I do...
Just on the education of the process, it seems to me that you can't limit that only to the players and the management staff around the men's and women's team. You have to include selectors, some administrators.
Correct.
Because to hold a selector accountable, he needs to know what power he has,
Correct.
and he needs to exercise.
Correct.
And if you take Mr. Manak's scenario with the Kaya Zondo incident, I think Mr. Manak accepts now that he should have been stronger at the time. So the problem there was not that there wasn't a policy in place. There was a policy in place, but because of a perceived threat or a genuine threat, that I'm sure the Ombudsman will decide on whether to make such finding. Mr. Manak didn't put his foot down, and Mr. Zondo was not played. But at the end of the day, if the policy was applied, you ought not to run into those sort of problems. Just for the record, can you say whether that's correct or not? Because the transcriber doesn't pick up the nod of your head.
You are correct, Chair. I think one of those improvements is quite important because you are appointing people, you're putting policies in place, let alone those issues shows now that they were not sufficient enough to deliver the desired results. Because behind those conversations where we're not present, you're expecting that the intent of what Cricket South Africa is trying to achieve is actually people are representing us to that fact and to the T. And that's why it's quite important that one of the key issues will be difficult for the system is to scrutinize the people that we bring into the environment to assume specific roles that are going to be very important in taking South African cricket forward.
I actually put it to him that maybe it's one of those moments of weakness that come to all of us sometimes when decisions have to be taken, but as a human being, sometimes you know what is the right thing to do, but you don't do it.
And the robust discussion that takes place when contracting is happening at the cricket committee level, let alone at board, when the convener of selectors comes and says, this is my 17. Maybe in between the series and everything else as management and all that, we could probably be, as things are happening, because sometimes you'll see some of the things on the field and the horse has bolted. But you need to ensure that actually people are held accountable for some of the issues. And we cannot come here in hindsight and say, well, all was rosy and this didn't happen or whatever. It's very important that we need to continue striving to have that positive experience environment for our players.
Mr. Chair, in the interest of time, I'm inclined not to go into all the detail about the Kaya Zondo incident because I think that's been dealt with by Mr. Manak, Mr. Zondo himself. But if you'd like me to, I'm happy to take the witness through all of that.
I don't think my reading, unless Mr. Koza tells me otherwise, that Mr. Zondo ought to have been included in the squad, and he was not included.
Correct.
And so if that is then there's no debate about it. We can go to the next issue.
I think, Chair, for the record, I need to make one comment. That was a missed opportunity.
Yeah.
Especially in the challenges that we faced with of trying to encourage black African batters to come into the fore. Because at the time, Mr. Zondo was performing and all that. But the report speaks to you about the intent at which, and when you look at some of the people that actually form part of this task team, they're credible people in society that investigated this matter of Kaya Zondo. And in there, you're sitting with Advocate Pikoli, who was the chairperson of the Social and Ethics Committee at the time.
I think in fairness to Advocate Pikoli, he didn't end up being on that committee.
Yes,
Correct.
yes.
And then also you had Mr. Nomenara as the SC, as well as Tabang and Mr. Ondi O'Connor, was also passed on at this particular time. But the issue which is very vital, I'm saying it's a missed opportunity, because if we would have taken it then, I'm always asking myself how many aspirations of young cricketers we could have reached out to in communities that would have been, want to be the next guys on and all that, like they've clinged on to a guy like Temba Bavuma.
Mr. Koza, I just have one question with regards to the Kaya Zondo saga or incident. Why was Mr. A.B. de Villiers not, if you do know, as you're representing CSA, why was Mr. A.B. de Villiers not sort of part of the investigation? And I know Advocate Arons has stated that he didn't really give his version, and there was a conclusion basically without his version. Yeah.
It's very unfortunate that, like I said, I can only speak from the report that we're sitting with, and the correction probably could have been directed at Mr. Norman Arendse, who was part of the committee, probably would have been able to tell you why I didn't go that route over AB de Villiers. But in the reports, I don't see anything that speaks to that process. So it makes it difficult for me to comment on it.
Sorry to ask you to comment on that, as you're correct, because I do recall now Advocate Arons saying that I think at the time he was on tour. Mr. A.B. de Villiers was unavailable because he was on tour, or something to that effect. My concern is just how does CSA hold individuals accountable? You know, if they're not called to answer to those type of incidents where they've contributed to.
I think in every contract of every player, a disciplinary code that speaks to that, as well as the terms of employment for each and every one. So now that's why I say it's very difficult for me, because if there was any issues of that nature, then there would have been an investigation, and if there needed to be a disciplinary that effect, it would have happened, because we've had issues before where maybe a player has transgressed one or two issues and we needed to do that, and they normally would have been represented by SACA, for example, in that inquiry or whatever, because some of the incidents that we deal with are what's happening on the field, transgressions of the normal playing condition. But this, to me, is that it would be interesting to hear from the people that were involved, to say to what extent actually happened here, because you would have expected some sort of a inclusion of whatever, irrespective of being in tow or whatever. You would have expected that there would have been a report from him that speaks to that aspect.
Was the former CEO part of that investigation? Longard, is it long?
No, I think at that time,
remember,
he may have been.
he was.
Because I know that one of the issues
was.
that Kaya Zondo is not happy with is the fact that Longard was part of he took part in the decision to exclude him, but he was also part of the investigation.
That's why I say Mr. Longard was there as the CEO at the time.
Yes.
And then Mr. Norman Arends was a board member at the time. Mr. Andy O'Connor was a board member at the time, and as well Mr. Tabang was he vice president at the time, I think. So that's the delegation that was put together to look into this. So to be frank and honest, they probably will be the ones that will give more detail to what transpired there.
Yeah. But in any event, the conclusion was that his exclusion was not fair.
I think the issue which is very important is that his exclusion was definitely not fair. But also to qualify it is that now the task team, they didn't feel, although it felt it was unfair, they felt it was unfair, but not on the basis of race or discrimination. Because like I said, we missed an opportunity.
Yeah. Okay.
You then deal in paragraph 185 and 186 with the national transformation in Daba that CSA hosted in April 2018. And then you list 16 very honorable intentions that CSA wanted to advance. I'm not going to go through all of that in the interest of time, but can you tell me whether there has been monitoring in regard to the practices that CSA wanted to adopt, and that was indicated at that Indaba?
That is correct, Chair. I must speak from a cricketing services department. We had 6 resolutions that speaks to the development of the game, and we also had 6 elements that spoke to the professional aspect of the game. And from that Indaba, for example, we needed to make sure that we report either at our cricket committee, because the progress and everything is part of the meetings that we have with these various subcommittees, which are headed by the various chairpersons. And I can confidently say, for example, at the top of my head, because I don't have that in front of me, under, for example, amateur cricket was the advancement of women's cricket and making sure that we can build the structures. And we've done most of the issues that we were intending to do to try and make sure that we can improve the development of cricket in that aspect. On the professional side, when you speak about women's cricket, it would have been about improvement of the international aspect, making sure that women have access to certain things and all that. So now those issues, for example, under the men's cricket, at the top of my head, it will be speak about the advancement of black and specifically black African parents in terms of how we're going to support them through the transitions and all those type of issues at various levels. So at every given committee meeting, we're not just only getting there and just hand over a report. Because remember, the committee members also needs to come prepared, knowing to exactly what we're going to put in front of them. So every year as well, in relation to that, we do an assessment, because remember, some of the interventions is not things that you can do over 3 months. You can assess the progress over an annual basis. So when we have our coaches conferences, for example, because part of it was to improve the coaching systems within Cricket South Africa, you're able to go back and see whether we've made advances in that particular aspect. So from where I'm sitting, and Mr. John as the head of transformation and stakeholder relations, he can confirm that on the amateur cricket, I think all the 6 aspects of what was identified, we've rolled out. And on the professional cricket, I think we are left with 1. Even if my memory speaks to me well, it could be speaking about the style of play of what we want to derive as South African cricket, because we needed to develop the DNA. That is still in progress.
Okay, Mr. Koza, then you go on to deal with Lourdes Bosman's allegations about being left out of the 2007 World Cup by virtue of what Lourdes suggests, him being forced into some procedure for a back injury. But it seems to me that apart from press articles that you can rely on, you don't have personal knowledge of all of that.
No, I think, Chair, you're correct on that. And I think it's quite fortunate that we also have Corey in the mix, who was the interim coach at that particular time. And he could probably also speak about these issues around that. But from where I'm sitting, the issues which are very important, we've tabled our affidavit based on the reports and everything that we could come across.
As I understand it, Doc Musaji had dealt with some of those issues, but if the panel has any questions, we can put that to Mr. Fanzayo when he gives evidence, given that he was the interim coach at the time. You then have, in paragraphs 203 to 214, you deal with certain allegations leveled by Mr. Salowa. Can you please take us through that?
I think, just not to dwell too much on Mr. Salowa, it was also the issue around the amount that he was alluding to, because it was quite a surprise for me as a cricket administrator that at that particular time we couldn't have had a semi-professional cricketer earning 15,000 a month. So what we're giving into in terms of account is to say now what were the level of payments in terms of our records that we came across and all that, and we're giving testimony towards that. And I think the issue which is very important, that in the 2011-2012 season, for example, Mr. Slower, the figure is stipulated there in terms of what he was earning, which is significantly different from the picture that it was painted, that it was 15,000 rand. Because no semi-professional cricketer at that time, based on the way we were, would have been even earning that amount of money.
Mr. Salowa then also dwelled on the fact that he didn't get adequate opportunities in South Africa, and that resulted in him going to Uganda, and he eventually represented the Ugandan national team. Any comments about that?
Chair, I come from Northern Cricket Union. I worked for them for 12 years. And I was fortunate enough, and I think in his testimony he did allude to my name as one of the people that has helped him in this process. When he didn't have a contract, I tried to ensure that he gets a coaching job and organize some clients for him to coach so that he can actually make money.
You're one of the fortunate ones who were mentioned not to your detriment.
No, that was the fortunate one, the one who mentioned me positively. There's a couple of people that have mentioned me negatively, Chair. But the issue to note, Chair, and it's very important, context is key. At the time when Mr. Slow was coming up as a young cricketer, he was a top order wicketkeeper batsman. Now, within the northern system, and this is unfortunately how things work out, we had a gentleman called Abraham Ndlovu. He was also a wicketkeeper, top order batsman, Black African. So performance becomes key. And the stats and the records and all that speaks for themselves in terms of who had the upper hand at the time. And also leading up to that, when the franchise systems process was happening, under the Titans franchise in terms of the professional era, you had Northerns and Easterns actually feeding in. And you had a young Mangaliso Mtheshe, for example, who came into the fore. Now, the issue of limited opportunities, I can accept, in a sense that there were other Black African cricketers that were better performing ahead of him. The issue of him moving to Uganda, I think the context must be clear and fair. The gentleman that I replaced at Northern Cricket Union as a youth coordinator at the time was Mr. Johan Rudolph. Mr. Johan Rudolph was appointed as the head coach of Uganda at the time, and you can go and check the records. In him trying to qualify for World Cups and all that, he did approach 3 of these players in the Northern's environment, and Mr. Slowa was one of them, and Mr. Abraham Ndlovu was one of them, to say, guys, here's an opportunity, and I want you to try and assist us in this process. So to my limited knowledge at that time when I was at Northern, they went there to go and advance and assist Uganda in improving their cricket and also play the... If you look at Abraham Ndlovu's career, he even played to a level of senior provincial cricket and also had one, if I'm not mistaken, a professional game. And from the position where I was, I remember fighting with the board at Northerns at the time to try and see if they can contract him in a professional contract. Because Abraham Ndlovu's performances in 4-day cricket, second innings of every innings that he played, he was always averaging above 50. And so that's why Mr. Silowa's statement, unfortunately, he must speak about the reasons for going there. It was not due to limited opportunity. There were other Black African cricketers at that particular time that were better than him, but there was an opportunity for him to play international cricket and also make money out of the process as well, because he was not employed or earning money through cricket at the time.
Was he not at SWD when he was approached? I thought he had already left Northerns.
Correct.
So he left Northerns.
Correct.
He went to SWD, and he got this call when he was not happy at SWD.
So Mr. Silowa's journey, Mr. July, started at Northern.
Yes.
He came through the development structures.
Yes.
And then he even speak about playing under Malibongwe Maketa,
Yes.
who's the SAA and National Academy coach for Cricket South Africa. When he left Northern, he went to join Northwest.
Yeah, Northwest, yes.
And then after his stint at Northwest, I think it was quite well documented when he spoke about the treatment and other issues.
Yeah.
And that's where the 15,000 rand story
15,000
comes
yes,
into.
yes.
But to our records, there's no player at that particular time who would have been earning 15,000 rand, because the contract agreements that we've had between ourselves and SACA, because semi-professional contracts were governed by that, the maximum wouldn't have been 15,000 rand at that particular time. Because let alone last year when we disbanded the semi-professional structure, not even a cricketer was earning 15,000 rand last year.
No, oh, sorry. The point I was challenging from your statement is to give the impression that he left from Northerns to this country,
to
Uganda. Yes, to
Correct.
Uganda.
I think, Mr. Jula, it's not the impression that I'm trying to create. The issue which is very vital is that definitely players will move to see where they can get better opportunities. So he first moved around in the country to try and get that opportunity because he was not successful at Northern. And he attested to that. He even said he had to phone Malibongwe and he came back for a second stint with Northern at that particular time. And the key issue to note is that through his frustrations of moving around and not finding comfort, his former coach or guy who administered cricket back in the years was appointed as a Uganda coach and approached these players to say, you've been moving around. Here's an opportunity, come and play. And you can earn resources from that.
You then deal...
Mr. Koza? Sorry, Mr. Masaji. Mr. Koza, is there pay discrimination between black and white players? Because some of the players that have come here stated that white players were earning more than black players, and they stated various reasons how they came to that conclusion. And then obviously the unions, when they were here last week, when they addressed the SJN last week, denied those claims. So what is CSA's view on that, and where's this perception coming from if the unions are denying the pay discrimination between races?
You must, maybe let's depart from the point of remuneration is something that we negotiate with SACA in terms of what will be the maximum, what will be the minimum. And it's to ensure that we need to make sure that players are not discriminated against. They cannot be paid lesser than the minimum that we've agreed to with SACA. As Cricket South Africa, we provide a pool of money to our members to say our contract pool, let's say for this year, it's 8 million. Now you need to offer contracts. Just know the maximum is this, the minimum is that. Mm-hmm. And you need to adhere to that contractual processes. And most definitely, I think there will be an element where some players will arrive with agents, try to negotiate the best possible payment structure for themselves. And then there will also be those that you find that probably maybe the comments that you're saying that he might be arriving there on his own. And because of him being in part of the development program for a while, they might say, hey, here's one of the minimum contracts that you have, or maybe it's a rookie contract. But the other element has also happened, because as we try to make sure that we intensify our transformation efforts, some of the players overnight, the black players, also end on the other side of the scale, which means they actually became wanted players, which means the only way they could end up is where actually people are prepared to pay them the top dollar that they're ending up with. And then when you look at that, and I think Mr. Bresky also touched on it, because it was an issue where I must ask myself, is it right or wrong? But at that time, if a guy is valued at that particular time and the member is prepared to actually pay that top dollar, the cricket sense doesn't speak much into that contracting process at that particular time when it comes to that value. And so now you do get a sense that one thing I can assure you is that no one has ever been paid the minimum of what we've agreed with SACA, or below that. We've always complied to them, because if there wasn't, because remember the key important issue is that once those contracts are signed, between ourselves and SACA, we facilitate that administrative process, because the signed contract, the value and everything, SACA has to collect, see whether as well that all the benefits have been taken care of, and that all the minimum and maximum whatever, and we'll even have a graph of saying, this is the pecking order. And then in that pecking order, when we go to CEOs meetings or engaging with some of the professional teams, you also want to understand what is the logic behind your signing, your adding of contracts and things like that. And some of them will say, yes, the agent wrestled our arm and we didn't want to lose this guy. Hence we ended up having to pay this guy so much amount. But the issue is this, it's like any other environment. I think when you start speaking about money, nothing is enough. Because all of us, we feel we need to be given more. But I do take cognizance that there could have been those that probably felt that they'd not been given the rightful thing. And also to place it in context is that the graph of a cricketer goes up, and then closer to retirement, sometimes you find some of them are not being retained at the maximum. They start negotiating with them to say you need to take a pay cut because you're not giving us the maximum or whatever. So now some of them are not retiring or exiting the game from the level that they were at. So a year or two, he might have to come down in terms of his remuneration. Maybe if the complaint is based around those issues as well, it could be that you have to look at the career span of the individual.
Mr. Koza, then in paragraphs 209 to 214, you deal with what steps CSA takes in order to make sure that the transformation policies are understood and implemented by the affiliate unions. Please take us through that.
Chair, it's quite important. I mean, the Indaba itself is an event. But you cannot do something 1 year and wait for 5 years to actually engage and get processes going. So there's various mechanisms that we follow. We do have roadshows that we have at our member level. We do also bring also annual coaches conferences, because you also have to also indicate to the coaches, where are we getting winnings, where are we coming short, and how can we improve next season to be able to prepare accurately. And also, there's different internal memos that we communicate between ourselves and the members throughout the year. But also the issue which is very important as well is that we have different forums. We have the Chief Executive Forum, which actually in charge of the operations of the cricket ecosystem. In the Chief Executive Forum, you have CEOs of the various entities that are affiliated to Cricket South Africa. That is an operational structure that you find that also we meet from time to time to be able to ensure that cricket is operationalized, and most of the teething issues are actually tabled there so that they can be fixed operationally, that we don't have to wait for another Indaba to be able to address our issues. And when we have this annual coaches conference, Chair, it's quite significant that it has to be at the back end of how you try and improve the South African cricket system. We do award a coach of the year for professional team, semi-professional, back then a coaching manager, someone from the hub, for example, to able to, and including most recently a coaching framework coach, who have performed well countrywide. They get recognized at CSA and they get given an excursion tour overseas. And part of that is to make sure that they go, maybe we target a conference. In that conference, they get exposed to different sporting coaches and things like that. In their return, we plug in the coaches conference, because as much as we're assessing what has happened and planning to move forward, we also look at whether is there any issues that we've learned from some of these conferences to try and improve the coaching systems within South African cricket.
Okay, then we go to coaches and umpires. Brian Nzunzu complained that there are no opportunities for former black players to become coaches or umpires. Can you comment on that, please?
Chair, the statement is incorrect. If you go back and you go and look at predominantly, like I said earlier on in my statement, more than 90% of controlled appointments at member level and even at CSA level, most of those players, most of those coaches are former players at different forms. They could either have played at a professional level in terms of international, or they could have played provincial, or they could have played just amateur cricket strictly at the bottom. What is very important, I've also listed some of the coaches that are former players in the process, which are actively actually in charge of some of our high performance structure and some of our professional environments.
Mr. Koya, I'm not going to get you to go through all of that. We need to save time. In 217, you deal with the issue of the umpires. Just take us through that, please.
Chair, this is another area of my responsibility. And before I get given out, I need to just comment, and we've listed a couple of processes.
I was just raising my hand.
I can see you giving me out, Chair. Chair, CSA, for the professional environment, we contract umpires. And these contracts are at 3 levels. There's guys that will have a 2-year contract because of they are closer to probably maybe making it towards ICC and being recognized at ICC level, so we can transition them. So we want them to focus because they are that close. And then there will be a next year of guys that have a year contract, and then there will be guys that are on an ad hoc basis, which we contract them on an 8-month contract. And we've listed some of these panel umpires that we've listed here. And I'd like to draw in the name Abongile Sodumo. He's from the Eastern Province. He played professional cricket there as a wicketkeeper batsman. And he's one of the guys that actually we transitioned from playing into umpiring. Why am I mentioning this? At the same time, there was a gentleman who sat here in front of you, made all sorts of allegations about racial issues within the match official space, Mr. Mjekula. Mr. Mjekula and Abongile Sodumo, Chair, we've picked them up. And they were players, and I remember Mjekula was post his injury and all that, and we needed to transition them somewhere because there were going to be those that probably were going to fall off the cracks. We actually did something that we didn't have, and I didn't even take it through my principles because I could see the long-term vision when it comes to this. At the time, our mesh official coordinator was Mr. Carl Hedder, who was a white person, reporting to me. And he said, these are the 2 individuals, they're former players, and we think we can fast-track them because they're showing the criteria and the potential to become umpires for the future. I said, because we cannot offer them contracts, let's do a dual career approach with these two individuals. Let's make sure that while they're trying to pursue their ambitions of becoming umpire, we also plug in some sort of a level of education. Because I'm not comfortable just by giving a monthly stipend to an individual to get whatever figure we've agreed to and then live off that and hoping that he'll one day become an umpire. Because it's not a guarantee that he's going to get a contract down the line. When it comes to Sibongile Sodumo, success is there. The rest is history. He has a contract with us. He earns money through that as a retainer. And for every match that he stands on, he gets a match fee for whatever format that he's standing on. The gentleman that came and said here in front of you, chair umpiring is an ethical issue.
I don't think you need to convince the chair of that
Correct.
issue.
And the issue for me, which pains me, he's placing me in places that I've never been. He comes here to you, Chair, and says he had a conversation with me at the national tournament where I failed him as a leader because he complained about racial issues. I'm hearing this for the first time at SJN. This is an individual that I've made sure that he gets a stipend, that we put him through a vocational training through plumbing to be able to do a course of that nature while pursuing umpiring. But to cut the story short, none of the allegations that he said are true. Because none of those issues, when he was still with us and we were assisting him, did he bring it to the fore and in the period to say there's racial issues. The issue came in when we started cancelling his contract because of the unethical part that he played in facilitating exams back at this environment where he's operating from. Because he actually literally gave the people that were there to write an umpiring exam the answers to be able to think, which is unethical. And as him being a contracted CSA employee at that time in terms of the fixed term contract that we had to act on it. And umpiring is an ethical issue. So his testimony here to me to tarnish us and place us in places where we don't want to be, I don't accept it. And I feel as what we did for him as Cricket South Africa, I felt sorry at the time, but I think the time has also allowed me to calm down in the process and understand that sometimes this session is being used for wrong reasons and it dilutes the real issues that we as Cricket South Africa are supposed to address.
No problem. So, Mr. Koza, if I ask you about the coaching, what are the challenges with the level 3 coaching? Because I understand from, I think one of the players that he was saying that he's had level 2 for a long time, but he's not able to acquire level 3 coaching. What are the challenges there?
Sure. I think the important thing to note is that the mini cricket coaching qualification level 1 and level 2 are conducted at member level. And then level 3 and level 4 is conducted at national level. So the member has to recommend you to be able to come in. So what we do from a CSA perspective, let's say one of our members has nominated 5 people, and maybe we're accepting 3 this year. The 2 missing out, we're prioritizing them for the next one. So what you tend to pick up is that now some of the people definitely will say, I'm not getting my opportunity to transition into a level 3. And this also speaks to where we were from a development perspective. Because remember when we brought in the coaching framework and we tried to intensify coaching at hubs, we also needed to intensify the education and prioritizing those guys. Maybe in hindsight, by us prioritizing our needs with those individuals that we want to put our systems forward, some of the people felt neglected to say other people are being prioritized ahead of them because of our need to try to transform. I think the challenging thing there is that only a certain amount of people can be taken at CSA level for that level 3, because that level 3 course allows you to coach at professional level, while the other level 2 and 1 allows you to operate at amateur structures.
Okay, no, thank you. And in terms of transformation, is there a transformation objective there or agenda in terms of who is recommended for the level 3 coaching?
No, most definitely. I think the one key fundamental issue that we did as Cricket South Africa as well was we appointed the first female within our high performance structure, which is Danisha Davnaren, who's a former Protea women's cricketer who played in an era where there was no contracts at that particular time. She's a level 3 qualified coach, and her record speaks for itself in terms of what she's achieved with KZN, and hence when we identified her, it was through an interview process. When we looked at her, we said, hang on, here's someone that will probably down the line serve South African cricket. Then we spoke to the coaching manager at the time in KZN to say, facilitate the development of this individual so that when an opportunity arises at CSA for an appointment, that she is better positioned. And in the courses as well, we do, some of our provincial teams that especially playing in the top section, they were coached by females before. And the issue which is very vital is that it seems like coaching, it's an area where we need to also broaden it up, because it was an unfancy space. But I foresee that there's an appetite. The more professional we became with the Protea Momentum Proteas team, more players that wants to exit, wants to get into a coaching space. But we don't want them to retire first and decide. When you want to be involved, let's take you through the journey now and do those interventions and prepare you accordingly before the time. Because I'm a firm believer, and I've made a statement and people were not happy with me. I said that the next Under-19 World Cup, when we go with for women, which is earmarked at 2023, I want a fully fledged women's management team. And now some of the coaches that are coaching within the female space, they were not happy. To say we're striving to get into there, and why is this guy making such a statement? Because my dream is to have the Momentum Proteas team being coached by a female. And it cannot happen if I don't set up all those mechanisms to be able to make sure that that first woman that we appoint is successful at that level.
Mr. Koza, what role does diversity play in the selection of people to do the level 3 coaching course?
Chair, I think what you tend to pick up is that because of our focus and everything, predominantly the people that come to our level 3 courses has been probably 60 to 70% black people. And because of the way we're finding ourselves, that these guys are finding themselves in key positions at various levels of our game. And for us to equip them is quite important. And then to counter some of the issues as well, we introduce what we call an advanced level 2. So in advanced level 2 was where we bring some of the aspects of the curriculum of level 3 to the guys that we cannot tap into. So which means we run this regionally, and we get specific specialists that comes and deliver these modules to these guys. So now we're actually also having another layer now of identifying level 3 coaches. So if you go through that advanced level 2, you also get now all of a sudden to say, okay, this was the right appointment. He went through this course, so that the transition and the pass rate, success rate becomes a lot easier. Because the one thing is to put people through courses, but they're predominantly not meeting the high standards. So it was important to make sure also that we look at our system and redo certain things. And Chair, it would be false of me that I don't mention the following. We are the first organization, Chair, to have an interactive coaching platform worldwide. And this was brought to my attention by our service providers when we were at the KFC mini cricket seminar. Because currently within the KFC mini cricket program, you can go online, you can register for a course, you don't have to drive anywhere, you can actually do your course online. And you can be assessed and everything else and get your certification and all. That's one of a kind. And what we're doing now, we're also advancing our level 2 and level 2, level 1 and level 2, which we're launching it next month. They also take up that form. Because we want to limit the excuse of saying, I need to drive somewhere for me to be able to do a coaching course. We need to make sure that some of the issues technology allows, that we can actually simplify the processes.
It seems to me that what you're doing is no different to what the universities do. So, for example, at undergrad level, if you have 300 undergrad students, you might only end up with 50 of those students that will be admitted into a master's program or an honors program.
That's true, sir.
Okay. Then, Mr. Chair, with your permission, I don't think I need to go through 219 to 227 because it seems to me that that's fairly uncontentious. But if there are questions about those paragraphs, I'm happy for those to be put to Mr. Koza.
It was actually at 231.
Perfect. Thank you, Chair. All right. So 231. Let's deal with the lotto funding issue, and you deal with that in paragraph 231. Talk to us about lotto funding and the allegation that the lotto funding has been misappropriated.
My apologies. I know we need to get to the end of this submission, but you talk about the current management structure. I guess then it might not be, because you're saying that in paragraph 228 that CSA's current management structure reflects transformation imperatives. 81% of the current management, which includes CSA affiliate members, are black. So I guess because there were complaints or submissions about CSA board not being transformed. So I don't know if maybe Buletsi or the chair will address that, because I know you're just talking about the management here.
The management I'm referring to the cricket ecosystem. Because remember, at member level, we're also subsidizing those positions. And 81% of those people employed in those positions, whether it's administrating or coaching, 81% of them is black. And so now the issue which is very vital is that now, I'm not branding these figures for the sake of just putting it there. It's an issue of the state where we find ourselves. People will say this game is run by black people. But the black people are there. I'm a living example of a competent black administrator. I'm sitting where I am because of the hard yards that I've put in.
Even if you have to say that.
Correct, sir. And the work supersedes itself. And the issue which is very important, I cannot be coming from the dusty streets of Mamelodi and leaving my ambitions of being a footballer to cricket administration. That's why when the going gets tough, Chair, I always remember my first meeting when I went to Northerns and being exposed at the age of 15. When I arrived there, between myself and the club chairperson of the time, because we arrived early, we were the only black people in that environment. And I saw the opportunity, I said, this is where I need to be. Because this way, on the field, I'm not sure where I'm going to get to. But yeah, I can influence. Because if I can end up in a position of influence, I can probably structure the cricket system a lot better. And my record speaks for itself, say, of my 12 years at Northerns. And I don't blow my own trumpet. So the issue, which is very important, is that the game has transformed. And administratively, coaching-wise, it has done that. But that speed is not what you see on the playing side because of the Achilles heel of the different issues we've highlighted in our affidavit. And if we had probably untapped resources, and I could probably speak to the Minister of Finance to allow me and tap into his budget, we probably will structure that in a much more efficient and quicker way.
Just, you haven't answered my question. Lotto funding. What do you say?
Mr. Aslam, you are upsetting me again here because the issue of Lotto is a personal.
Is a lotto.
It's a personal attack for me. In my responsibilities as a cricket official here at Cricket South Africa, I facilitate the application of the Lotto funding and the execution thereof, in line with the official, like the Transformation Department, which is headed up by a member and stakeholder relations manager, Mr. Jordan. So I've done all the applications, and Lotto will never give you money if you find that your previous records are not in sync. The challenging thing for me here, allegations have been made, and I'm not sure what it relates to, what are the facts, because in my communication with Lotto, they've never flagged in anything. And to show you that I take this personally, after these statements were made, we received a letter, say, from the Parliamentary Committee of Sport, saying, CSA, we want to know how you've spent all the lottery money that you've received and all those type of issues. But people have came in front of you, Chair, they've made this statement, but they don't prove the facts. And now we put our facts to the Parliamentary Committee. That's why I'm still saying the SJN process, it's a good process for us, because it will probably bring up things that we probably could have been taking for granted in the process. But when people come here and they make malicious statements which is not tested or probably putting facts onto the table, it pains me because it also questions my integrity. Because that money is meant for the stakeholders out there. I cannot come and sit in front of you and say we have challenges about infrastructure, but I'm taking the same lottery money aimed at making a difference and spending it elsewhere.
Chair, then in paragraphs 236 to 239, he deals with certain other allegations. I'm not so sure that they're as important as some of the bigger issues, but again, if there are questions that the panel have, I'm happy for those questions to be put to Mr. Khoza.
Yes, there are none from me.
Okay. Yeah. Chair, then all it leaves for me to do is to thank Mr. Khoza for spending as much time as he did with me and for demonstrating his passion to transformation. But as you say, it's a complex exercise and there's a road still to travel.
Chair, I think I also need to take this opportunity, and I know it's been an onerous task for you to be able to sit here and listen to the various testimonies and all that. And I think the report and the outcome that you're going to come up with and recommendations to Cricket South Africa will never be taken lightly from us as administrators.
That's what gives me sleepless nights.
So, but in hindsight as well, sir, on a lighter note, I know in the first interaction of SJN, Dr. Eugenia Kola announced me as Edward Kotse and that I'm colored. I'm hoping now today you can see that I'm a black African man and my surname is Kosa. That's, thank you.
Oh, well. It's now 1600 hours and 7 minutes. I had thought that I was going to hear another witness today who's sitting here, who had promised me that he won't be more than half an hour. But I've heard that before. And I won't take that risk.
The reason he knows that is us lawyers are notorious for underestimating time the witness will spend in the witness box.
Indeed. So I want to propose that even Mr. Mseki Politsi, who obviously would be longer, we should hear tomorrow. And if I'm not imposing too much upon you, sir, let's test whether you will take 30 minutes tomorrow, half an hour. I would propose that we adjourn today on the assumption that we're all available. And to what time do we adjourn tomorrow? Starting time, 10 o'clock? 10 o'clock will do.
Chair, just Mr. Van Zyl goes back to Cape Town this evening where he's based. I'm happy for the technical people just to chat to him about making arrangements and we can get his evidence done electronically.
Oh yes, yeah. Then that would assist us.
I can now justify my fee, Chair. That just saved CSA some money.
Yes, indeed. So let us adjourn for the further conduct of this matter to tomorrow at 10 o'clock. And we will take the evidence of Mr. Van Zyl then. We are adjourned until 10 o'clock tomorrow morning. Thank you very much, everybody, for attending.